Before we start this video, large thank you to Shop, a name I unfortunately cannot pronounce. Thank you for the support, my friend. Kijitalflix, nice to see your name again, man. Welcome back. Philip, Don, Kaigane, CJ, Steve, Lorenzo, Sammy, and Neil for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. Hello, everybody. If you celebrated Christmas, I hope you had a great time. Otherwise, if you were off for the holidays, I hope your holidays were nice. So, let's jump in now to the Character Effects Manager. And what we're going to do today is we're going to make some logic to process static effects, which are, as I'm typing here now, effects that typically don't change. They usually get added to you when you equip an item or something happens in game, like if you put on a ring or you have an armor effect that becomes active. Whether the case, this is not time dependent, is what I'm trying to say. Next, we have timed/status effects, not to be confused with static. And this is typically stuff like poison buildup, which we already have in game, but we're going to modify later down the road. Curse, toxic, anything that is basically on a timer. Like if you want to set your character on fire for X time, then we're going to need this. And lastly, you can have a third type, which I have in Nephilim, called instant effects. And I use this for stuff like processing damage or processing block damage. And the reason why I put this in the form of an effect is because you can make it heavily modifiable. You can basically choose your damage animation depending on the effect. You can add a bunch of things like poise modifications. And I'm going to do this later in the series too for you guys. It's not necessary, but man, it makes the project so much neater. And when you want to make specific things happen with specific damage instances, it just is a lot nicer. So let's make our first script of the video, and I'm going to call this Character Effect. And as it suggests, this is going to be the base class for our character effects. And let's put our namespace up here, and I'm going to derive this from scriptable object. That way we can create an asset in the project. Now, since this is just a character effect, it's usually going to be used for stuff like timed effects. So we're going to have a public virtual void and just call this process effect, and we're going to need to pass the character that the effect is being processed on. So you could, for example, if you have poison, you could tick this once every X seconds, and it will process the effect once every X seconds. As it is, it's pretty plain, and you can kind of do whatever you want with the logic inside of that functionality. Next, we're going to make a base class for static character effect, and this is, as it is suggested by the name, a static effect that is not time or tick dependent. When you add this to your character, it is permanent until it is removed through some other means. So let's start by copying the process effect and paste that there. And honestly, what might be better instead of saying process static effect is add static effect, because when you call this function, you're adding an effect to your character. And let's paste this down here, and then let's call this one remove static effect. And when you want to remove it, you're going to call this function. So we can start off here too by making a comment up here, so it's just very, very clear. Actually, I'm going to put it inside here. I'm going to say static effects are typically used for things like armor and equipment. Basically, anytime you want to add an effect to your character that is not time or dependent on some other thing outside, like if you want to modify a damage type when you wear a certain ring, maybe you want to make miracles do more damage or fire type attacks do more damage, then this is what you're going to use. And we've set up damage modifiers in previous videos, so we're going to work with that one today for our first couple of effects. Whoops, I hit the microphone. Sorry if that made a loud pop. I realize I'm on the player effect manager. That is not where I'm supposed to be. Let's go to the character effect manager, because we want this to be the base class, because we want this to be able to be used for all types of characters, player and AI. Now, we have that stuff here from Poison that we did a few videos ago, a while ago now. We're going to refactor that later on, now that we have this new effect system. But for now, we're going to keep that there. We'll come back around to that in a couple of videos. We'll just do it at the end of another video because it's not too important right now. So I'm going to make a header for static effects. I'm going to make a serializable field, and I'm going to make a list. The list is going to contain static character effects. And this is just basically going to be a visual representation of every static effect your character currently has active. Quite honestly, you don't even really need to keep a list. I just do it so you can see it, because you can just add the effect to the character and then remove the effect later on. But, well, the list does serve a purpose. It's so you can't duplicate effects and such. So it really is a security measure, and it's a nice precaution to have. Let's make a function here called add static effect. And I'm just going to put a static character effect that we need to pass, called effect, and let's make another function called remove static effect. Now, typically these things will be called when you want to, if you're going to put this effect on a ring, for example, when we add rings in the future video, upon equipping it, we're going to make an event that will make it if it has an effect, it will make it call this function up here, add static effect, and unequipping it will make it call the event remove static effect. So I'm going to make a comment here. We're going to say check the list to make sure we don't add a duplicate effect, which I'm going to show you how to do right now. We don't want to add two of the same effect. Now, how are we going to check for a duplicate, you ask? Well, there's an easy way to do that. Let's make each effect have an effect ID. This is also needed for saving anyway. If you want to give certain creatures an effect that's not bound to any piece of equipment, you just want the effect stuck to them, you can give it an effect ID and load every effect in the list by their ID when you load a character. I don't think Souls does anything like that, but if you just want to do it in your own game, that's a cool way of going about it. So we're going to make a for loop, and I'm going to say for, we're going to say I is equal to static character effects dot count, and then we're going to say -1, and then we're going to say I is greater than, and then we're going to say -1, then we're going to say I minus minus. So basically this is just going to go down through the entire list of effects we might have in this list, and we're going to say if this effect that we're checking is not null, then we're going to check it against the effect we're trying to add by comparing its effect ID. So we're going to say if static character effects I dot effect ID is equal to the effect dot effect ID, well then we want to remove one of them or not do anything, not add it to the list. You could just return here, but I'm going to remove it. I realize I haven't made a variable for the effect we're trying to add, so I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to come down here and just make a static character effect variable, a local variable for static effect. So if we do find a match, I'm going to say static effect, that local variable, is equal to the one we already have in our list. So I'm going to assign it to the one we already have in the list, and I'm going to remove it. So we're going to remove the duplicate we already have in our list, and then we're going to add the new one that we're trying to add. Now you could just say return and not do this, but I like this better because this is a kind of a bulletproof way. It makes sure that there is no duplicate. So we're going to say static effect dot remove static effect, and then we're going to remove it from our list. I will come back over this and explain it more when we're done writing it, just to be very, very clear, and I'm going to add some commentary. So if you're confused right now, just don't worry about it. Give it a sec, and we'll come back around. So then I'm going to say static character effects dot add effect. This is after we check for the duplicate. We're adding it to our list. And then I'm going to specifically target this effect, and I'm going to say effect.add static effect. And this means we're actually adding the effect to the character, not adding it to the list. So first we add it to the list, and then we process the actual effect and add it to the character. And lastly, this is not super important, but I think you should do it. We're going to check the list for any null items and remove them, because if you basically assign null to something in a list, the list slot is still there, but it's empty. So we're going to go down through the list by saying for I is equal to static character effects.count -1. If I is greater than -1, I minus minus. And this is just a long-winded way of saying look through every item in the list, and if you find a null item, so we're going to say if static effects I is equal to null, then we're going to use the remove at function. So static character effects remove at I. And that should clear your list of anything that would be empty spacing, basically. All right, now down below, we have to remove a static effect, and we're going to do that by using the static effect ID, as we just gave it up top, or as we gave it before a minute ago. So let's start by creating a local variable, and I'm just going to paste this check at the end for checking the list for null items because it's the same as above. Make sure you do that last, not first. Now let's start off by making a for loop, and it'll be the same thing. We're going to say I is equal to static character effects.count -1. And if I is greater than -1, I minus minus. So we're going to check every effect in our list. And if the effect in our list matches up with the effect ID we want to remove, we're going to remove that effect. So let's say if static character effects I dot, or does not equal null first, sorry, check for null before we check for the ID. So if it is not null, then we're going to say if static character effects I dot effect ID is equal to the effect ID we're checking for. And I forgot to put the effect ID in the function. We're right now looking for a static effect, which is not what we need. So I'm going to change that real quick. We just need an integer, or if you want to use a string for your effect ID, that's cool too. So we're going to say if static character effects I.effect ID is equal to the effect ID, well, we know we have found our effect that we want to remove. So what do we need to do? We need to remove the actual effect from the character and then remove that effect from the list of active effects. So I'm going to say static effect is equal to static effect character effects I. So we're assigning a local variable. And then we're going to say static effect dot remove static effect, pass the character, and then we're going to remove it from our list as well. So you can see when we're actually calling remove on the effect itself, we're removing the effect from the character. When we call remove on the list, we're just removing that from the list of active effects. The same is true for adding. One actually adds it to the character, one actually adds it to the list. And just to be very clear, I'm going to make some comments up here because I know that might get confusing if you look at it, because you would think to yourself, why are we doing the same thing twice? And I get that. So again, for loop, we're checking every effect in the list. If we find a double duplicate, what we want to do is remove the duplicate. So we're going to say right here, remove it from our actual character's effect. I'll make a comment here. We remove the actual effect from our character. And then right below that, we remove the effect from the list of active effects. So they're different. They do different things. One is actually affecting our character. One is just affecting the list of stuff we already have. But they're both very important. We need both. So again, down here, this is static character effects add. This is adding it to the list. So we add the effect to our list of active effects. And below that, we are adding the effect to the actual character. So this is what will modify the values on our character. I'm repeating myself a lot here because I really want to drill at home, because I know that can look confusing, which is why I encourage you to comment your code all the time. Because if you come back weeks from now and check this, this will make it very clear. It won't be confusing to you. And I have made a spelling error, so here we go, add. Now, I'm going to paste this below here too on the remove static effects function, and then we're actually going to create our first effect, where we add and remove certain things to our character. Since we set up our damage modifiers in the last video, I'm going to make two effects, one that modifies our physical and one that modifies our fire damage percentage. All right, so let's save that. I'm just gonna go over here and check. Yes, we're good. So let's make our first actual effect. I'm gonna call this modify damage type static effect. Now let's open that up and let's start off by throwing in our namespace, and we want to obviously have this derived from a static character effect. And then we want to override the add and remove static effect. Alright, so this is very straightforward because we made this very clear, or made it very easy to set up in our last video. So I'm going to make a header for damage type affected. And let's make an integer for the amount we want to add. And I don't know if you remember me saying this, but we use a percentage system. So example, if I say modify value is equal to 15, that's an extra 15% damage. Minus 15 will be minus 15% damage. You get what I'm saying? So use the value system like that if you did it the exact same way as me in the last video. Let's make a new enum, a public enum for damage type. And since I only have two damage types in this tutorial series, because I'm doing this for demonstration, I'm going to use those two. I have physical and fire. And we can use a simple switch statement here now to make this code really nice and easy to understand. I'm going to make a serialized field for our damage type. I'm going to call this damage type. And then down here, I am going to create an override for add static effect, and then an override for remove static effect. So, what do we want to do when we add it? Well, I think a lot of you know where I'm going with this. We want to basically make a switch statement, and let's make a switch statement for our damage type. And now, if the damage type is physical, we want to add the modified value to our character stats physical damage modifier. Likewise, if it is fire, we want to add the modified value to our character stats fire damage modifier. So you can do that by saying character.characterstats.physical damage percentage modifier plus equals modified value. Plus equals just means it's the same value with this added on top of it. So fire, it will be the same thing. You want to come down here and just say plus equals, but change the physical to fire. And again, plus equals just means it is that value that it already exists plus the modified value. So if fire damage percentage modifier is 100, it will be 100 plus the new modified value. Do the same thing down here, paste it, but change the plus to minus, and that way you're just subtracting it when the effect is removed. So I'll make a comment here to make this very clear again. When adding the effect, we add the modified value amount to our damage, or whatever you want to say. We can say to our respective damage type. And then when we remove it, we're just taking it away. So to remove the effect, obviously you have to have the effect. And if you have the effect, it means you've added it. So this should never throw off your values, because when you throw this effect on your character, it has to process the add static effect. When you remove it, it has to process the remove static effect. So you should never get any issue with this. So let's make a create asset menu. And I'm just going to make my menu name. We need to make a new header for this. Let's call it, or a new, a new list rather. Character effects. And I'm going to make a new little drop menu for static effects. And I'm going to call this one modify damage type. And then let's save that. Now we should be able to create this in our project now. So I'm going to go to data. I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call this folder character effects. And then you can make a new one here if you want to, and make one for static effects and regular effects. Up to you. I'm going to create, and it's not here, so I must have forgot to derive it from scriptable object, maybe. Let's go back and check. Let's go to the base class, which is static character effect. And yes, it is not scriptable object. So make sure that's scriptable object, or you will not be able to create an asset in the game. So let's right click and try that again. Create. There it is. Character effects, static effect, modify damage type. Okay, so let's just call this modify physical damage. That's the one I'll do first. And I'm just going to say, yeah, 22 is fine. Let's give it an effect ID of 0. That's okay, because this is our first effect. It can have an effect ID of 0. Make sure you never have duplicates. And now let's go and make a way for this to be called on awake. So basically, you're only going to use these typically when you equip something most of the time. So I'm just putting this here to show you. But you can call them on start if you already want to assign them. But what I'm trying to say is, in my project, I only assign effects when I do certain things in game, like equipping armor. So I don't need to put it on start. But just for demonstration purposes, I will show you. We can do a simple for each loop, and we can say for each effect inside the static character effects, we want to add the static effect. So basically, for each effect that's in our list before we start the game, when the game comes live, we want to check those effects and then add their actual effect to the character. And again, we shouldn't be able to have duplicates with our code set up this way, so this should work fine. Now I'm going to save that, and I'm going to drag in my modified physical damage. And before I actually start the game, I'll show you. We go to stats. My physical damage is at 100. Now it should go to 122 if this is working correctly, so I'll start the game. We zoom into our character here, and I click on the player, and this should now be 122. So I scroll down, and yes, it is. It is 122% of my normal physical damage. All right, cool. So let's try another one. Let's duplicate this. Let's change this to modify, or rename it to modify fire damage. Let's change the effect ID to 1, and let's change the damage type to fire. And I'm going to make the value say 18, just so it's different. Whoops, I almost forgot to change the effect ID. Make sure that you change that effect ID. Now I will drag it in, so we have two effects on the go at one time. And now I should see a physical damage of 122 and a fire damage of 118 if this works correctly. So I go and click on my character, come down here, and yes, there you go. We have a fire damage of 118 and a physical damage of 122. All right, guys, we're going to expand upon this a lot. I have a lot of cool stuff to show you. We can do like basically a lot of overtime effects. And when we really flesh out this system a bit more, we're going to add rings, and we can add events when you equip things. So you can add and remove these effects to your character. Apologies for the delay in this video. Obviously, I was off and taking some time off for the holidays, as I'm sure a lot of you guys were too. So, as usual, if you did make it this far, be sure to drop a like and leave a comment. It does genuinely help out the series so much. A large shout out and thank you to my Patrons. It's because of you guys I get to keep doing this, and I really appreciate all of you. And lastly, thank you guys so much for a wonderful year. I wish you all the best in the coming new year with your projects and your studies. I'll see you guys in the next one.